Good afternoon, Buckeye fans. I'm Patrick Murphy from Bucknuts and 247 Sports, here with Dave Biddle, my colleague. Dave, we got some pretty not news. We knew all this already, but we finally got to meet with Ohio State's new coaching staff, the hires that Ryan Day has made yesterday. That included on the offensive side of the ball, Justin Fry, who will be the offensive line coach, new defensive coordinator. Jim Knowles, who was announced all the way back in December, but didn't start until after the Rose Bowl. And then two of the more recent ones on the defensive side, safeties coach Perry Allano, who comes from Cincinnati, and secondary coach / cornerback coach Tim Walton, former Buckeye. Sorry, I was reading these names in the wrong order there. Former Buckeye, played at Ohio State, so a name people may be familiar with. Let's start with Ryan Day, Dave, because we met with him first to kind of talk about these hirings. What did you make of Day's kind of explanation of bringing in these guys? Obviously, a number of guys had to depart for that to happen. And do you think he got it right with these four new hires? Obviously early on, but what first impressions?
Yeah, my first impressions are that he knocked him out of the park, Patrick. I think he did a great job. And yeah, we won't know until the games actually start, and frankly, until the season's over. But we look back on it. But I have high expectations for, really, he turned over his coaching staff by 40%. I mean, that's really rare unless you're taking over a program. I don't think I've ever seen that at Ohio State. So yeah, I think that he did an excellent job with these hires. Jim Knowles, Justin Fry, Tim Walton, Perry Eliano. The first two names are the most important, starting with Jim Knowles. He's the most important of that group. He's the head coach of the defense, as Ryan Day calls him. Justin Fry, I think, is going to do a great job with the offensive line, and I like the two DB coaches as well. The second part of what you said really was the first part. I found it interesting, and I always appreciate Ryan Day's candor. There's only so much candor you can give to the media when you're a football head coach. Sure. But I really thought, when he was asked about the questions about, these were tough decisions you had to make, but, the defense wasn't performing. You had an elite offense, and he went through it, and just he recognized that, yeah, I have personal relationships with these men, and I like these guys personally, but I have to do what's best for Ohio State, yeah. And that's, you have to, and that's easier said than done. But when you're making whatever money he's making, I know his contract will top out at $7.3 million. It's not really even about the money. When you're the head coach at Ohio State, you need to do what's best for the program. That's exactly what he did. I know he liked Greg Studrawa personally. I know he liked Carrie Combs personally. I know he liked Al Washington personally. Matt Barnes, it sounds like he got maybe he was the one that was maybe invited back, but got a better gig. The point is, he did what was best for the program, and all Buckeye fans should be happy about that.
Yeah, and Carrie Combs was one that I was interested in asking about with the number of questions. You and Steve each got a question, so we got two from Bucknuts, but I did not get to ask. But that was one I was interested in, just what the conversations were like there. Obviously, Carrie Combs, that was his second time at Ohio State. He handled that demotion so well last year, the speech he gave and just sticking to it, getting to work. If there were any conversations between him and Ryan Day about staying on, obviously he's landed on his feet at Cincinnati, and just what that was like, because you are getting rid of somebody who has given a lot to this program, and, to kind of send them out the door after a tumultuous season, that could not have been easy, even for a coach like Ryan Day, who has had to do this before. So it's certainly a turnover for the defensive staff, especially, and leading that, as you said, head coach of the defensive coordinator, Jim Knowles. You were in the press conference with him. What were your impressions of Coach Knowles? I think Buckeye fans have heard by now he's a bit of a quirky guy. So what did you make just from the human talking to you during that press conference?
Yeah, he was less quirky than some people had led me to believe. I mean, everybody said he's intelligent and quirky, like you said, and the quirky stuff is actually really cool in my book. It's stuff like what he'll do with his defensive players. This isn't the only thing he does, but when he's teaching them about the opposition, the opposing offense, when they're breaking things down, he'll do things in like game show and quiz show style, where they go through and, the player's name pops up. His face pops up on whatever they're doing. That player has to stand up in the meeting room. He has 2.5 seconds to answer the question. If not, sit down. You're not going to have longer than that in the game to make a play. So little things like that, and his players love him. You hear like the former Oklahoma State players. One of them's following him to Ohio State, and Tanner McAllister. even his former Duke players. They all love him. They love this guy. And I went in with high expectations, and I think he even exceeded my expectations, which I didn't think was possible, because I went in thinking, is he going to be like we had with Jeff Hafley, where you're in there for like 2 minutes, maybe 5 minutes at the most, and you're like, wow, this guy has a PhD in defensive coordinating, and that's what he has. I mean, I think Buckeye fans are going to love this guy. He's very thoughtful. He's great with the media, though. He'll tell you what he's thinking, and he's not coach speak guy. Again, I mean, and I liked what he said when he was asked by Tim May, this isn't, you talk about how at Oklahoma State, how you had to build it. And by year 4, you guys were really, really good. And, number 3 total defense in the country. And Jim Knowles said, listen, it's not lost on me that I don't have 4 years here. I got to turn this around right away. Like, I love that. Like, everybody knows that. You don't pay a guy $2 million to come in here and be like, well, maybe by midseason they'll be okay on defense. Like, no. This needs to be an Ohio State defense by the time Notre Dame comes to town for game 1, and I think it will be. I think this is Ryan Day's next Jeff Hafley, but I think the difference here is Jeff Hafley was a young, up-and-coming coach. I think Jim Knowles, he just wants to be a defensive coordinator for the rest of his career. He's not that old. He's 56. He's been a head coach back in the day at his alma mater at Cornell. He's now been a defensive coordinator at the Power 5 level for the last 12 years. Signed a 3-year contract at Ohio State. So I think he's going to coach as well as Hafley, but I think he's going to stay at Ohio State for a while. I do not think he has head coaching aspirations. I could be wrong about that, but I think he's going to be a defensive coordinator at Ohio State for several years.
Let's talk on the field, because that's where it's going to matter the most, especially for our viewers and listeners. They're not going to care as much about what he says, but what he does. So Jim Knowles' defense, we've talked about it a little bit based on what we've seen from Oklahoma State and what he's done in the past. What did he say about the defense yesterday, or what was that, Monday? And what did you take away from the on-field stuff that he's going to bring to Ohio State?
Yeah, it's interesting. He runs what people will call a 4-2-5, but it's interesting because there's really a hybrid outside linebacker defensive end. So you could call it a 3-3-5 or a 4-2-5, however you want to do it. And that hybrid player is really the key to the whole defense, as he put it. I mean, he didn't put it. That's paraphrasing. But he said that guy needs to be intelligent and reckless. How often do you hear that? That's only in football you're going to hear that. That guy needs to be intelligent and reckless. And he went through and talked about other things. I mean, he's got to be able to stop the run. He's got to be able to rush the passer. He's got to be able to cover tight ends and even wide receivers. He's got to be a jack of all trades and a master of all those trades. And it's really the most important player on the defense. And so he's going to have 3 true defensive linemen. He's going to have that hybrid. He's going to have 2 true linebackers. He's going to have 2 true corners, and then the 3 safeties. One of them's a slot safety, so really like a third corner. One's a boundary safety, really like a strong safety, going to help a lot in the run. And the other's kind of the free safety. They call it the bandit. So he's going to start 3 safeties, one kind of like a hybrid, and he mixes things up. He is known for confusing the opposition. Just because we line up like this, you probably think we know what we're going to do. You don't know what we're going to do. He takes pride in confusing the opposing offensive coordinator, confusing the opposing offense. That's what it's all about, making things uncomfortable for the quarterback. Oklahoma State, in addition to being the number 3 total defense in the country this past season, they were excellent in sacks. They were excellent in third down. They were excellent in tackles for loss. That's how you get a great defense. If you're able to do that at Oklahoma State, they'll be able to do that at Ohio State for sure.
Well, he's going to have some help. He will run the defense, but we know he's going to handle coaching the linebackers. Al Washington, one of the coaches that's no longer with the program. As I mentioned before, Perry Allano is the safeties coach. Tim Walton is the cornerbacks / secondary coach. But it sounds like, from what Ryan Day said, and tell me if you've heard this differently, Dave, it sounds like those two are going to work in conjunction to kind of run the secondary. What do you make of having 2 guys there as opposed to what Ohio State has done and other places have done in the past at times, having one coach that kind of oversees the whole secondary? What do you think about breaking that down?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, they've done that in the past where they've had a safeties and a corners coach at OSU. They're going to have to work closely together. But, yeah, and I think Tim Walton, if one of those 2 were higher on the totem pole, it'd be Tim Walton. Yeah. But still – yeah.
Title.
Yeah, exactly. Not just because he's an ex-Buckeye. I shouldn't say ex-Buckeye. They don't like that. Former Buckeye player. Once a Buckeye, always a Buckeye. Former Buckeye player. I love having him back. That reminds me of my childhood when they were not good at all in the early John Cooper years. And finally in 1993 is when they became good again. And Tim Walton was a senior, I believe a captain on that team. And fond memories of that 1993 team, even though it didn't end well. Pure Cooper style didn't end well that year. But actually, he got his first bowl win that year against BYU, but lost to Michigan, of course. Anyway, yeah, I think the biggest thing here is those guys are going to do what Jim Knowles wants them to do. Like, it's not like, Perry Eliano and Tim Walton and be like, well, okay, well, this is what we're going to do in the secondary. You guys figure out the front seven. It's like, no. Jim Knowles will tell them as the head coach of the defense, this is what you guys need to do. So for the fans out there, I wouldn't worry too much about, well, the secondary is split up between these two guys. Those guys will work well together. They're extremely intelligent. They have great resumes, and they will be taking marching orders from the head coach of the defense, Jim Knowles.
Yeah, and maybe that's something we need to emphasize a little bit more is that head coach of the defense thing, going back to Jim Knowles. I mean, Ryan Day in the past it came with hiring Jeff Hafley, and it sort of had Carrie Combs mixed in. He was very much, I want to run this defense, and it was that single high, 4 down, and he sort of addressed that. And while they will still do some of that, you mentioned 3 safeties. One of them will look more like a traditional safety. This is going to be Jim Knowles' defense. It's not Ryan Day telling Carrie Combs, this is the defense I want you to run anymore. Now, we did go out and find somebody who has run a similar style, but I think that's important. He wants to focus on the offense, and he wants to trust a guy on the defensive side, and that guy's Jim Knowles. And then obviously there's the trickle down underneath with the coaches underneath him. I talked with both Perry Allano and Tim Walton, was really impressed by both of them. Obviously they're coaches who have done this before. Perry Eliano got the experience of what Cincinnati did this past year. Obviously, he coached the Thorpe Award winner, another All-American. That defense got them to the college football playoff. Not to take away from what they did on the offensive side of the ball, but it was that much improved defense that got them there. And maybe things didn't go well against Alabama, but a lot of teams don't have things go well against Alabama. But he was really impressive, talking about his experiences and the chance to come to Ohio State, a chance to win, all that stuff. He'd worked with Luke Fickell, who gave him his blessing on moving to Ohio State, which I think is cool. Obviously, Luke Fickell's time here is well documented. So I was impressed by him. And then Tim Walton, as you mentioned, the former Buckeye player, who was a defensive back from 89 to 93. He's been in the NFL for 11 years, so there were a lot of questions about recruiting and how he will handle kind of getting back into that. He's not a guy who has any social media. He said he's working on setting up a Twitter account, which I think he'll need for connecting with these kids, probably Instagram too, if we're being honest. But from a pure coaching standpoint, I think he's going to be great. We posted a story when the hire was made about the comments Jalen Ramsey made, not to bring up Super Bowl rivalry here, Dave, but Jalen Ramsey, who left the Jaguars shortly after Allano was hired, but then still said he was one of the best, if not the best defensive backs coach that he'd worked with, talked about how he forms relationships with his players, and Allano brought up relationships. I think I counted 26 times in his 27 minutes that word came up yesterday. So that's really big for him, getting to know these guys, and all these coaches will have a chance to do that in the coming weeks. But it was very much about recruiting, relationships, getting to know these guys, and I think even though Tim Walton will have to do some adjusting with the recruiting, I think he makes a lot of sense. Dave, I know you popped in for some of those coaches. What did you like from what you heard?
Yeah, I saw some of Tim Walton's. Perry Eliano was doing his interview the exact same time Jim Knowles was, so I didn't hear any of that. But yeah, I mean, I like it. I find it very interesting. It was basically like a Perry Eliano for Carrie Combs trade with Ohio State and Cincinnati. We'll see how that turns out. But yeah, I mean, I really like it. Like I said earlier, I think this was an ideal fit for Jim Knowles coming in, finding 2 guys that not that. He had worked with those guys in the past or anything like that. But I like that Ryan Day, and this makes sense. You hire the head coach of the defense. You're going to involve him in the process of hiring the new coaches. Jim Knowles was heavily involved in hiring Tim Walton and Perry Eliano. I have a good feeling about that. Like I said, maybe I'm a little biased because I remember him as a player, but I especially like Tim Walton. I love his NFL experience. And, he needs to get some social media accounts. Might need to throw TikTok in there as well. But he'll recruit just fine. I mean, kids love talking to these former NFL guys. He's got an engaging personality, and he's got a lot of experience at the collegiate level too. And I like that he has 1 year of defensive coordinator experience at the collegiate level and 1 year of defensive coordinator experience at the NFL level. It didn't necessarily put up great stats as a defensive coordinator, but I like how he has that experience.
Absolutely. And let's not forget that there was a hiring on the offensive side of the ball. Greg Studrawa is no longer with the program. Justin Fry, who's worked with Ryan Day in the past, is now the offensive line coach. You were there for that interview. Your thoughts on that? Well, first, why do you think Ryan Day felt that they needed to make that move? Because it wasn't like Ohio State's offensive line was bad. So why do you think that they needed to replace Greg Studrawa? What does Justin Fry bring that maybe Greg Studrawa didn't?
A couple of things with Stud. Okay, so you're right. They weren't a bad offensive line. They could even say they were a good offensive line overall. In certain games, they weren't a good offensive line. But what did we all say entering the season? This was going to be a great offensive line. That was the expectation. They did not meet expectations. So that's number one. They fell short of expectations, however you want to look at it. Number two, and I don't know if this was all Stud. I'm sure all the coaches were involved. But the idea of having tackles play guard, not a good idea. You need guards playing guard. That's another. But I don't think that really had anything to do with getting rid of Stud. I think it was overall the offensive line underperforming was one of the factors. The other factor, and I think this is really important, it's not Studrawa's fault, but he had back surgery during the season. He believes he got injured during the Minnesota game, kind of got knocked down over it on the sidelines during a play. Didn't think anything of it. Woke up the next day and couldn't even get out of bed. His back was so, sore, and ended up having back surgery. And back surgery is nothing you want to have. I mean, it wasn't like Thad Matta where it completely got botched and he couldn't function anymore, basically. But it was harder for him to get around. It was harder for him to travel, go on long recruiting trips. And that's the other factor I would bring up. I think maybe people gave him too much a hard time about recruiting. I mean, he's landed some decent recruits, but I do think they can recruit better on the offensive line. And I think that's one thing Justin Fry is going to do. Justin Fry, one thing real quick about him, he's just extremely impressive. He's one of those coaches where you talk to him and it's just like, wow, it's 100% easy to see why Ryan Day was like, I want this guy. Now, obviously, Ryan Day had worked with him before, but it's just one of those guys where you listen to Justin Fry talk about anything and you're like, okay, this guy gets it. Talk about offense as a whole, run game, specifics with the offensive line. He gets it. I think Buckeye fans are really going to like him. Young guy in his 30s. He played at Indiana. His wife is from Ohio. They met at Indiana. I believe she was a swimmer at Indiana. He's a Midwest guy. So I feel like he's going to be here for a while. I think eventually he'll be a head coach, though, so he might not be here forever. But I really like the Justin Fry hiring.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about the offensive line last year. I wonder how much of that had to do with keeping some guys happy as opposed to actually getting the best five on the field. But that's a conversation for another day. What talent there is on the offensive line, what's coming back for Ohio State. Did Justin Fry talk at all about, what he sees for this offensive line going forward, or is it too early to even get into that?
Well, it was just like with Jim Knowles, like they didn't want to get into specifics, but you can tell they like the talent. They know that they have the talent. They both cautioned against, you can't just watch film of last year and base everything off that or last few years because you don't know if a guy was playing hurt. Jim Knowles referenced a few guys on defense. I bet he was talking about Cody Simon. He's like, well, I'm finding out we got some tough guys that, maybe shouldn't even been playing that were playing through injuries last year. Same thing on the offensive line. He talked about how he loves this talent up front and he's inheriting a lot of talent, but he did not get into specifics like this is what Paris Johnson needs to do as our starting left tackle and things like that. He didn't even mention Paris Johnson's going to be the starting left tackle. We know he will be. The biggest position battle, in my opinion, is going to be at right guard. I think it's going to be Donovan Jackson, but there's going to be heavy pressure there or heavy competition there. We'll see what happens with Harry Miller. Harry Miller will be in the mix at center too if he sticks around. I believe Luke Whippler will have that job though. Matt Jones will be the left guard. DeJuan Jones coming back at right tackle and bouncing around a little bit here. I like the depth there too with Josh Fryer and some of those guys, Enoch Vamahi, Zen Mahalski. So, but no, he did not get into specifics that much about the offensive line, but you can tell he loves the talent Justin Fry does of these guys, and he expects this offensive line to be very good from day one.
Sure, and you look at what Justin Fry was able to do at UCLA, and I believe he served as their run game coordinator or had one of those titles, and it was pretty successful, all things considered. Before we wrap up, we have a few questions here in the comments that I want to get to. The first one, Dave, you mentioned running a 4-2-3 or 4-2-5 or a 3-3-5. How does that factor in with JT and Jack Sawyer? What do you think will be for two of the, they were prize defensive ends coming in last year as freshmen. They'll be sophomores this year. Both got a good amount of playing time. From what you heard yesterday, from what you've seen, how do you think they factor in?
Oh, they'll be big factors. I mean, you can put, let's say you have Jerron Cage at nose guard, or you have Tyleek Williams at nose guard. You could have JT Tuimoloau as the strong side end and Jack Sawyer as the weak side end, and then still have the Jack linebacker, which might be Cade Stover or whoever, Steel Chambers. They're going to be huge factors. I mean, I expect more out of them next year than Zach Harrison, and I'm glad Zach Harrison's coming back. You need depth. We've seen it time and time again where, a guy maybe underachieves his first 3 years, and then the light comes on as a senior. Steve Miller in 2014, and I think Zach Harrison has a higher ceiling than that. So, but to answer your question, I think Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer, if they're not starters, which one of them will be a starter at least, they're going to be a huge factor on this defense. And Knowles will mix things around. He's not going to be married to, okay, we got to do this, this, this. He mixes things around. So sometimes you might have, 3 true defensive tackles, maybe 2 true defensive tackles and a D end as the 3 defensive linemen. Sometimes I might be 1 D tackle, 2 defensive ends type of thing. He'll mix things up. And a guy like Tuimoloau, he's going to get bigger and bigger. He'll be one of those guys that can play inside and out.
Another question here. That was from Mondell Wadsworth. Thanks for that. Another question here. This is a little bit off topic, but on topic for what's going on in the world right now in the college football world. The man here asks, I'd love to hear you guys speculate regarding what's happening with Jim Harbaugh. Dave, thoughts?
He definitely wants to leave Michigan. The question is, does an NFL team want him? And the more I hear, I think the answer to the latter question is no. Now, maybe the Minnesota Vikings do. We shall find out very soon. I mean, he's got an second interview with them on signing day, which has got to be that's an ominous sign if you're a Michigan fan, if you want him to stay. Now, if you're an Ohio State fan, do you really want him to leave? I don't know. I know there'd be some schadenfreude there. I get that. But, do you really want Jim Harbaugh to leave? What will happen? I don't know. I guess I will. I agree with John Bacon, who said he thinks it's about 60-40 that Harbaugh will stay at Michigan. And that's because probably there's at least a 60% chance the Minnesota Vikings are going to turn him down. So I think it's basically down to the Vikings. Maybe the Dolphins are going to be in the mix. Obviously, the Raiders didn't want him. The Bears didn't want him. Will the Vikings want him? It'll come down to that.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting question. We've talked about it. I know you've brought it up on the BM5 a number of times, but it'll certainly be interesting. And obviously relevant to Ohio State, less so than Michigan. But and then we've had a couple questions in regards to this for you, Dave, but we'll pull up this one here. Are you going to the Super Bowl?
I am not. I didn't want to mortgage my house and go to the Super Bowl. In fact, from everything, I've never been to one, so it would be nice to go to one, cross it off the list, but it's not a huge bucket list item. From everything I've heard, going to the Super Bowl is actually a letdown because it's like a sterile environment. It's not like the diehard fans of both teams. It's a bunch of corporate stuff, and it's kind of a sterile environment for a football game. And you know me, I love watching football on TV anyway. I think football was made for TV. The Super Bowl is the ultimate event on TV. Bengals are in the Super Bowl. Your Rams are in the Super Bowl. Who dey?
Yeah. For those who didn't know, I'm a Rams fan. Grew up in St. Louis, live in Columbus now. So them moving to Los Angeles didn't impact me. But yeah, we talked about it yesterday.
And you were already a fan of the Lakers, so it worked out kind of well for you.
That's a whole different story. But we talked yesterday. Just it's too much. I mean, maybe if it were closer, if the game were in Indianapolis and it was just paying for tickets and sleep in the car or something, you wouldn't have to worry about it. But having just been in Los Angeles for the Rose Bowl, things are not cheap out there. And yeah, I have a nice couch, a nice television. I can have some beer and watch the game and try to avoid your tweets during that game. But
I'm just going to try not to tweet. That's my
yeah. Good luck. Me too.
Good luck. Right.
Yeah. We'll see. All right, we're going to sign off. We'll be back. We're going to do this a lot more this off season. So if you watch these live, we appreciate it, whether that's YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. They'll also be available on all of those formats archived. So like, subscribe, all that. Also, we'll post this as a podcast. I think that'll be up to Dave. Dave, if you want to post this as a podcast, so people can find it there as well. But yeah, we'll be doing a lot more of this. We did some during the season, but we just get busy during the season. So pretty much anytime we have some big news or things like that, we'll try and jump on here. We'll try and answer some questions too. It won't be long till spring ball starts. We're already in February. We're not too far. I think like March 14th or something is the projected, something right around there. And then the spring game, people are thinking April 16th, which I believe is right before Easter. So it's going to come fast. We'll have plenty of news. We'll get to know these guys a little bit better. If you missed any of this, like I said, go back and watch the archive version. It's all there. Dave, thanks for jumping on with me. I'm glad we were able to figure out the bugs that we dealt with during the season. But yeah, we'll do more, like I said. And thank you guys for tuning in. Dave, I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Patrick. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks for everyone joining us. We appreciate that very much.